everyone. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. I am so excited for today's Lunch and Learn with Eva Moskowitz, who, if you aren't already familiar with her, is one of the most influential people in education reform, and a lot of the things we'll be talking about today. And I can't wait to pick her brain, ask her questions, and then, of course, just like always, go over to your questions and hear what you want to learn from her. So with that, we can turn off the screen. And Eva, thank you so much again for joining. It's such a pleasure to speak with you.
Nice to be here with you and everyone else.
Awesome. So I want to hear a whole lot about advice you have and thoughts you have for people who are thinking about career and education. But before we go to that, can I just hear about what Eva was like in college? Like, who were you in college? Were you, always in the library, always in class? Tell me about yourself.
Well, I took my academics very seriously, so I often closed down the library. But I was also very active socially and politically. I founded something called the Political Participation Center at Penn, where I did big voter registration drives, really always interested in the public square and how to get young people more involved in influencing the public square.
And so if you think back to when you were in college, were you always dreaming of becoming a politician? Like, was there something you thought you would become?
Oh God, no. I thought I was going to become a teacher, professor. I just always thought civics was really important and civic obligation was really important. And so never thought I was going to become a politician in a million years.
Awesome. And I know you did become a teacher. You worked at Prep for Prep, at UVA, at Vanderbilt. So we'll talk about that in a second. But just to finish off on college, because I know that a lot of people on this call are in college, what's something you wish you knew before graduating, or when you speak to college students today, regardless of what their interest is, what's a piece of advice you give them?
Well, I was kind of narrow in the sense that I didn't realize there were all these professions out there, and I didn't, even one company, I didn't understand that there were a lot of different jobs, and I think I narrowed myself too quickly. And I had sort of a little bit of a fixed mindset about the variety of opportunities, and I don't think I spent enough time talking to people who knew better, not because I didn't want to, but I wasn't very well connected. And so I didn't even know where to begin that process. And so I'm so enamored of this summer series that you have where people in college students, but also college graduates can really do their due diligence about what is available, because jobs are not always what they see. And there's a lot more to the job, whether it's marketing or data analytics or frankly, education. I think a lot of people think, oh, I know what education is. And sort of they stop there rather than do the deeper dive into a particular sector.
Okay, great. So I then have to ask, like you said, you were really passionate about education in college. So where did that passion even come from in the first place?
Well, I grew up in a family that certainly valorized education and ideas. But I also grew up in the New York City school system, which unfortunately was not very good. And I saw at a pretty young age that depending on your zip code, you could either be on a path to success and opportunity or not. And I actually grew up in Harlem, and I went to school with kids who were just as smart as my brother and I. They were mostly Black and brown, and they suffered a school system that really didn't provide them with much opportunity. And that fundamental unfairness that you weren't actually starting at equal points, because if you didn't have educated parents who could make up for an inadequate school system, you were at a really profound disadvantage. And that kind of nagged at me. I mean, I went on to get a PhD in American history, and I was an elected official. But at the end of the day, the inequity in public education is what has driven me for quite a long time.
Awesome. And before we keep going into your career and career advice you have, can you spend a minute talking about like what Success Academy is and does? I mean, I think most people on here know it's the largest charter school network in New York City and so on, but can you talk a little bit more about just what you guys do just for a minute?
Sure. So we are educating 20,000 kids, K to 12. We are one of the largest and fastest growing public charter networks in the country. And what we have done, aside from size and scale, is that we're the #1 achieving school district in the state of New York, even though the vast majority of our kids are poor and Black and brown. And we were not just going for closing the achievement gap, we were really trying to reverse it. And not only in academics, we have a world-class soccer program, we have a world-class chess program, we have a world-class debate program.
I didn't know that, wow.
Yeah, our kids competed in an international gallery exhibition in the visual arts. Our kids have performed at, nationally competitive dance programs. We're really about the whole child. And for us, the whole child is a pretty important part of equity. It's not just that affluent kids have a better academic program, it's that they get to play sports and chess and dance, and they get to discover their own talents. And that's a sort of hidden aspect of inequity that is very top of mind for us at Success.
Awesome. So I would imagine that who you employ as teachers is probably a very core part of what makes the student successful. And I know that, and we'll be posting the link for everyone watching who wants to apply for a teacher role at Success Academy. We'll be posting that link shortly. But I am curious as to what the backgrounds of people who you see are the most successful educators are. So when you see, a teacher who you think really stands out enough to catch your eye, like what would you say is their background?
Well, first of all, you're certainly right that talent is what makes the secret sauce of success. While curriculum and content is important, it does not teach children. So the adult talent is what is the critical ingredient here. And it might be surprising to people, your viewers and listeners, that the entrepreneurial spirit is actually very important for teaching and learning. And having that drive to innovate and perform. We're a high performance organization. And so all of the skills that you think of having to do with high performance organizations, I would say first and foremost, being a problem solver is going to be key.
Oh, I think, so I want to make sure, I think you went on mute, but that sounds great. And I guess from like a background perspective, would you say then that you guys are attracting STEM all the way? Like what majors do you look for? Is someone who studies engineering just as qualified as someone who studies maybe English and so on?
Sure. Well, we teach engineering, K through 12, and in high school we offer electrical, mechanical, biomedical, and environmental engineering. So if you study engineering, we have that course that we offer the students, but it really isn't any discipline because we teach mathematics,
Awesome.
Art, science. Our history program is world-class. We do several years of world history in middle. American, we do macro, micro economics. There actually is no discipline that, we don't teach. We teach statistics, probability. So it would be hard for you to have studied something that isn't relevant.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the teachers who are joining your team. If someone wants to stand out at your school and catch your attention, which I know you don't get a chance to sit every day with every one of the teachers. I mean, you guys employ a lot of teachers and educators, but what can someone do to stand out as a teacher and be kind of thought of as a rising star?
Well, I think it's really about learning the art and science of teaching. It really is about someone who is self-reflective and hungry for continuous improvement. There's an art of teaching, there's a science. And by the way, Liz, teaching is not what people think it is in a more traditional school. It's really sort of, to be a great teacher, you have to manage all of the aspects of instruction. There's a lot of data analytics in teaching. There's a lot of studying of student work. You have to be a people manager. Little people, but they're people. And so you have to really understand the psychology of kids. You have to understand if you're teaching high school, you need to understand adolescent development because that's relevant to your job. You have to be someone who knows how to build relationships. You have to be someone who knows how to collaborate with your grade team or your content team. If you're teaching calculus, you have to work with all the other calculus teachers. It's not an individual sport teaching, it's really a collaborative sport. And so, there are a lot of skills that you would associate just with a high performance organization that you need in education.
Awesome. So speaking of a high performance organization, Success Academy employs a lot of people outside of just being teachers, a lot of the operations roles and all the way to principal. And so for those watching who are eager to get into education, they're fed up with maybe their local hometown's education system, they want to get into it. As you know from your personal experience, there's so many ways to get into it. You can become a teacher, you can work in operations, you can strive to become a principal, you can and go in management, you can go into public policy. Talk about how you recommend those watching who are eager to get into education should think about which path is the right one for them.
Yeah, and I would say even beyond education, if you're interested in an innovative, high-performance organization, we joke a little bit, we're the Google of education. That's success. But I would say, you want to join an organization that is cutting edge and that's going to offer you an opportunity for career pathways and development. And we promote pretty quickly for organizations, but you need to understand that we have a marketing department. If you're interested in finance, school financing is a totally undervalued and under-recognized area. There's a lot of creative thinking that goes on about where do you invest your money as an organization? What is going to net the most for students? How do you build that financial model that is going to do the most good for teaching and learning? So you could join the finance department of schools. You could do marketing. There's a certain amount of R&D that we do in education. Communications is a huge part of education. We have a creative agency because we produce so much collateral for kids, for teachers, for our parents. So if you're a graphic designer, you could come either work for Success or another charter and utilize that skill set.
What about the policy side? I know you spent some time on the policy side as well. Not that you don't also still get involved in it today, but what about those people who are considering that path? Like, what's something they should maybe know to consider whether to go in-house, if you will, versus to the more government side?
Well, not every charter school has a policy and government relations shop. We do, because we have a dual mission. So our mission is to provide world-class education to the kids that we educate within our four walls, but to change public policy for those kids who don't actually get to come to our school. Our students get to us by random lottery. So we're not allowed to select our students. It's just supply and demand. There's a digital lottery, and that's how students come to us. And by the way, we have thousands more who want to go to our school than we're able to serve. And so that's where the lottery kicks in. But for us, because we're so dedicated to reforming educational public policy, we have people on the ground who work with City Hall, work with state government, and work with federal government to improve educational public policy. You know, I will say not every charter school goes into that arena, but we do. Okay,
great. Just a few more questions, and then guys, everyone watching, I see amazing questions coming in, so thank you. We'll get to them really shortly. I have to ask, we're obviously ever since the Black Lives Matter movement has really progressed in the public eye, a lot of people are thinking about the inequities in our system. So you see firsthand just how much our country has some of its faults as it pertains to underrepresented minorities and children from socioeconomically poor backgrounds. And it's been brought to light a lot recently. So I'm curious where you think what you think education and educators' roles is in fixing this issue or helping.
I would say that in terms of anti-racism, there is no more productive venue than the education lane. You know, we see ourselves at success as really flipping the power dynamics of this country and being for our students a pipeline to power by ensuring that our kids have access to privileged institutions of higher education by dint of being well educated. And so we see ourselves as on the front lines of tackling institutional racism.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so in addition to this movement going on, we also are in a global pandemic, which is awful, and it's affecting a lot of people. I'm curious, for those watching who want to become teachers, or maybe we're planning to graduate and become teachers right away, how do you see students and recent grads should consider adapting and being prepared for teaching in a COVID environment for the next maybe 12 months, not even just at Success Academy, but just across education? Like, what challenges do you think schools are going to be facing due to COVID?
Well, I will say, you know, in 14 years of running Success Academies, you know, this is sort of the strangest time and, you know, scary and unnerving. You know, we made the decision to go remote in March when the city and the state were saying, no way, we're going to keep the schools open. And I was very, very worried about the safety of our staff and our kids and flattening the curve, et cetera. So we have been remote since March 13th. And if you can imagine the logistical feat it took to stand up remote learning K-12 for thousands and thousands of students, we were lucky that we were digitized so that our kids already took assessments digitally, and we had a one-to-one program. So I won't say it was easy, because there's nothing about reimagining public education that is easy, but we were well positioned. I think for young college grads, you know, this is a really hard time. There are high levels of unemployment. How the work is going to be done in every sector is, you know, a big question mark. And it's forcing a level of adaptability and flexibility that, you know, I see myself as a fairly adaptable person, but this has required a level of adaptability that, you know, we had to move all of our talent acquisition to remote. And most companies and organizations, there is no in-person. You know, how exactly, we don't even know yet in New York State whether we're going to be allowed to open on campus, but all that has to be worked out, and it's not resolved yet. The only thing I can guarantee is that the kids must be educated. So whether it's on campus, whether it's remote, or whether it's hybrid, at Success Academy, we plan on delivering world-class education, whatever it takes. And we're prepared to do that. And I think any high-performance organization is going to say that they're going to meet their obligations somehow, some way, by going over, under, around, through.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, we've gotten so many amazing questions, so I'm going to switch over to the audience questions. We have two that are very similar, so I'll combine the two. But Richard, who's a junior at Swarthmore, wants to know, he's asking, does Success Academy offer summer internships or opportunities for current college students? And I think what he's getting at is like, how can a college student really prepare to get and get their in, if you will, and the education, get practice? And it relates to Lee from Emory University's question around what skills would you recommend students pick up to develop themselves so that when they do apply for that job as a teacher, they have, their best chance?
Sure. And look, internships and the whole world has gone, remote. So that is a little bit challenging. I think that, with success, and I'm not saying this is true for every organization, we don't expect our recent graduates to know how to do the job. So we offer for teachers 13 weeks of training before they start, because you could read a lot, but it's ultimately a performance sport, and you need help and support, not only before you start the job, but we have a very low manager to teacher ratio. We have a lot of assistant principals because we understand that your first year of teaching is particularly hard, and you need a lot of mentoring, guidance, support. You don't know how to plan. You don't know how to, take kids on a field trip through the city. So we don't actually expect our new employees to know how to do their job. And so at every level of the organization, we train and mentor and support. We have extensive onboarding plans so that everyone can be acculturated to the work and understand how to use the technology and all of that, because it's a fairly unique system. So then to one of the questions, I think from Lee, he wanted to then know, what are some of the skills that maybe your recruiting team or you look for in a resume when you are thinking about recruiting someone? So it sounds like you're not expecting them to be a teacher and know how to take a bunch of students on a field trip, which makes perfect sense. And your training program sounds second to none. So what would you say are some of the things that students should get experience in college? I mean, it really is, a lot of this is sort of your personality. Are you reflective? Are you open to feedback? Do you have the level of grit and determination? Because while, I love my work, I couldn't imagine doing anything other than what I'm doing. It does require being able to fail sometimes and pick yourself up, and sort of, it doesn't come easy. I think some people get confused about the nobility of the mission and the ease of the work. If you are in front of 32 kindergartners, it can be a little daunting to kind of fail in front of them, right? They don't follow your instructions, and you may have graduated from the greatest university on earth, but the kindergartners don't really care. And so, you have to learn the art and science of teaching, and that can be humbling for people. And the question really is, do you have the drive? Do you have the persistence and perseverance? Are you self-reflective? Do you get along with other adults and know how to work in a team? Do you have the collaboration skills that you need? And do you have, I would also argue, positivity? Being in education requires you to believe in the infinite human potential of those in front of you. And if you're cynical and negative, that is not actually the best quality for being in education. And so,
right.
not for everybody.
Wow. That definitely, I like that perspective of the kindergartners don't care where you went to school. That's great. Okay, I'm going to switch over a totally different topic. Veronica, who's a political science and Spanish senior at Union College, wants to know, what was the most eye-opening experience when you served on the New York City Council?
It was all eye-opening.
How come?
Civics, and I always felt that everything I taught them was wrong, because it doesn't work that way in practice. The most eye-opening.
Or even just like, why is that your reaction? Why does it not work that way in practice for those of us like myself who've never worked in the government?
Well, 9 of my 50, I worked in the second largest legislative body in the country. There are 51 city council members in total. And during my tenure, 9 of the 51 were indicted and prosecuted. And so I hadn't experienced, most people.
Wow.
I grew up with that, that wasn't the case, or, the way a bill is actually, made. It's not, I imagined it as more about the public interest and less about moving up the political ladder. Now, I served with some really good, dedicated citizens, but it wasn't always, the public interest was not always the driving concern for every bill. So that was sort of eye-opening to me. It was also eye-opening how local government worked. I remember once that, as a local city council person, not only were you responsible for education and healthcare and so forth, but you were also responsible for like potholes. And I took that really seriously. And so when someone said there was a pothole, I worked really hard to get the Department of Transportation, which is in charge of potholes, to fix them. And it's like really hard to get a pothole fixed. And I didn't know that before I became a city council member. I got more potholes fixed than any other council member in the history of New York City, but it was a crazy way to fix potholes.
Wow. Well, on behalf of everyone else who learned how to drive in New York City, which is where I learned how to drive, thank you for fixing all those potholes. That's awesome. A quick question, and then we'll go back to some of the career questions. Melissa from Penn wants to know, you have a lot of books in your background. What's your favorite book or recommendation for people who want to get into education?
Let's see, there are a lot of good books on education. Stephen Brill's book on class warfare, Joe Williams' book on public education. I have written several books on education. Mission Possible is one that I wrote, but there are a lot of books that I would recommend. I don't think they would tell you necessarily what it's like to be in a school or part of an enterprise that is trying to fundamentally reimagine public education, because it's pretty gravity-defying work, and what it's like to do that work, I don't know if you can get that if you're reading about national education public policy.
Great. Okay, we have a very ambitious student, Carmina, who is a student at Rutgers University. She wants to know, my goal in life is to be the United States Secretary of Education, to centralize the American education system, make it more proactive, as well as fix the equity issue in the education system as a whole. What advice do you have for me to help me get there? What position should I look to acquire on my way there? And what kind of a career connection should I be making?
Well, I would say that you need to be in schooling. You wouldn't want to come at that without knowing what it's actually like to run a magical classroom or to run a magical grade team or a magical school. I think if you just come at that from public policy, you will issue edicts that will not make sense for kids and teaching and learning. A lot of educational policy is kind of, and it doesn't matter whether it's from the left or the right, it's not really very pragmatic because often folks don't know what it's like to actually be in a school and run a school. And one thing I would just say is, you know, I've talked a lot about some of the great skills you need and schools as high performance organizations. But if you also want to have a really fun work life, there's nothing more important than being with like-minded people who have the similar values. And one of the things we have so much fun at Success and in our schools is that we're with like-minded, high-performance oriented individuals who want to serve kids and teaching and learning. And so that journey of enjoyment and fun, you can miss that in a career. Like you can have a career that's financially rewarding and you can climb the ladder, and then you get there and, you know, you didn't really enjoy it. I think what's really compelling about schooling, it's a little like summer camp. You know, being part of a community, we do really silly things, pie throwing contests, potato sack races. I mean, it's not all about the academics. It's about building a magical educational community. And if you're part of that, there's something very compelling about that.
Wow, awesome. I want to get back to that because we have a few questions in that topic around students who want to know how to scale that across the country. But before we do, you talked about some activities, pie eating, et cetera, that just in a COVID world can't happen. I don't think anyone wants to partake in a potato sack competition right now. And so Rasha, who's a student at Bethel University, wants to just know, how have students and education requirements changed since COVID? What stayed the same? And what new perspectives have you had or gained since last semester during this COVID period, where maybe you learned more about students, their families, and so on?
Yeah, and look, it's certainly difficult, and there are things. I mean, you can't play basketball on the little rectangular box. But, you know, we have made do, meaning our kids, you know, did their band practice remotely, and it's not as good. Our kids sang remotely. Our kids did art remotely. It's harder, and sports is probably the one thing that is very, very difficult to do. You know, in terms of learning, you know, I think it reinforced our investment in digitization. First of all, we just wouldn't have been able to do it without a one-to-one program. And it's not just the devices, it's that the culture is digital. So if your kids are not used to emailing and getting all their assignments online and submitting all their assignments online, it's really hard to go remote and then teach everyone how to do that. We largely had that, with the exception of our littlest learners. And that was a little bit challenging because our kindergartners got email addresses for the first time in remote learning.
Wow.
And had to click on links. And clicking on a link when you're 5, you know, funny things can happen when you try and do that. But I think one of the learnings, aside from the digitization, is, you know, I think schools treat children as less autonomous than they actually are. And I think our kids can do a lot more alone without the teacher, without sort of all of the kind of supervision. You know, we had to administer our AP exams online. We've never administered an exam outside of the teacher's gaze. We
Yeah.
took proctoring really seriously, but we couldn't do it. And all of our kids took their AP exams online. And by the way, they did fantastically well. We just got our results a week ago.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And they changed the format on us, right? There was no multiple choice. It was all open-ended. And all of our faculty were, oh my God, the kids, we prepared them for one thing and now life is throwing them a curveball. And the kids were kind of zen about it. Like they can deal with curveballs. And I think it taught us, the educators, to have even more faith in the kids. The kindergartners can get their emails and click on a link, and the high schoolers can take an exam that has a totally different format, and life is going to be fine. And we can, we can be role models in adaptability and flexibility. So that was exciting because I think the kids really proved themselves in a way that was inspiring.
What an incredible lesson. I love that. Okay, so the next question, Megan from the University of Pennsylvania wants to know, what can we do to make this level of change and success in the school system more widespread? What kind of changes in programs at the policy level need to happen to promote this type of equity on a greater scale than just at individual schools? And what advice do you have for future policymakers who want to make that change?
Sure. I think the problem is less about what we need to do than the political system not really allowing the diversity of ideas. Meaning, we know there are many different ways to educate kids exceptionally well. There's not one way. You can have a great progressive school. By the way, we at Success are progressive, but reasonable people can differ. You can have a great traditional school. You can have a great progressive school. You can have a great co-ed school. You can have a great single-sex school. There are many ways to get to excellence, but the political system does not really allow us to change the way we're educating kids. So in New York City, for example, and in many places around the country, there is something called principal tenure, which is lifetime job security irrespective of performance. And no high performance organization that I know of has lifetime job security for managers. And yet, in many school systems across the country, that is written into state law. And so you might think, well, if enough people thought that was a bad idea, that state law would get changed. But the state houses are captured by special interests. So it's very hard to change something like that. That is the main barrier to creating educational policies that are in the interests of children. They're really oriented to protecting the interests of the adults. And that makes it really hard to have a more equitable system.
Wow. I just learned a lot. I didn't know that about, especially about tenure. That's wild. Okay, so obviously there's going to be a lot of things coming out of COVID related to mental health. I know that in the tech sector, there's a lot of startups creeping up there. And so Imani, who's a senior at Augusta University majoring in psychology and minoring in sociology, wants to know what advice you have for people who are trying to get into school counseling as a career.
Well, there is more need for school counselors than ever before. There was a great deal of need before COVID, but this has been devastating on, and it has, of course, had a disparate impact on poor communities and Black and brown communities. So social and emotional learning has always been important. It's very important at Success, right? All of the academic success in the world is not going to matter if you are not mentally healthy and mentally resilient. And so starting in kindergarten, we at Success invest heavily. We have social and emotional specialists at our schools. We have school psychologists. We have counselors, social workers, a whole bunch of different avenues for ensuring that the social and emotional health of our students is as good as it can be. And so there's a great deal of need for that at this moment in time. That is a growth area.
So to students like Amani, do you have advice on how, outside of, is it the same idea as with teachers where you don't have expectations outside of maybe their major area they studied for what they can do coming in, or are there any skills that they should in particular be trying to acquire throughout their college experience?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always better if you have some experience working with children rather than, you know, if you tutored or you, you know, worked at a clinic or something like that. But we are, at Success at least, we are happy to take people who have the degree and then we give them the on-the-ground experience. And for us, the school psychologist or the social and emotional specialist, they're not just working with the kids, because social and emotional learning, it can't be done for sort of a half an hour a day. It's not a curriculum. It's the adults need sophistication around how to help kids with anger management, or, you know, in kindergarten, there's a lot of work on sharing and how do you become a good sharer and how do you collaborate well? And that takes an understanding of the child's psychology. Excuse me.
Great, awesome. Okay, so Eileen is a student and wants to know, so they said, I totally agree that the human has inner power and we need to discover them by trying. So what do you think about the future of self-directed education? Do you think it has potential to scale up and maybe even replace the structured education system?
Well, that's a futuristic question and a good one. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think that self-directed learning has to be part of the K-12 trajectory. And we're not going to live in a world, you know, assuming we can protect our planet and get over COVID and all of these other things, we're not going to live in a world in which self-direction there's not an incredible premium on that. And so schools need to do their part to prepare students for that level of self-direction, not only academically, but socially and emotionally, and from a leadership skill perspective.
Great. Another question from another audience member who is interested in education, but not necessarily the teacher path. So Ina, who is a student at Columbia University, says, I'd love to learn about opportunities to help the organization scale up via strategic data analytics. Over the last 14 years, you've grown tremendously and effectively, and I hope over the next decade, you're able to reach more students. For someone with data analytics experience in higher ed, or maybe who doesn't have data analytics experience in higher ed, but outside of higher ed, and a PhD, what would you recommend?
Well, I love data. And we are very, very data driven at Success, not to the exclusion of the qualitative, because you have to, you know, you have to be able to look at what good teaching and learning looks like and what good pedagogy is. But we have a very, very robust data analytics team, and it's very, very important that people have dashboards at their fingertips. Our teachers have dashboards. Our assistant principals are principals, so that they can use the data intelligently to make instructional moves. It is impossible to be a great educator without data analytics.
Great. And then a very similar question from someone whose ears perked up, it sounds like, when you brought up finance opportunities within an education system like Success Academy. They want to know, like, outside of, so this person has 2 to 3 years of corporate finance experience, and they want to know, outside of just purely having that experience, are there any other tips you have for someone with that kind of a background who's interested in getting into a company or an organization like Success Academy? What other skills they should be focused on?
Well, I would just say that not enough educational organizations put a premium on financial analysis and financial modeling skills. It's actually one of the most important parts of running a good school district. How do you do resource allocation? And I would say, as the CEO, one of my most important jobs is to figure out resource allocation. Well, you can't do that if you don't have really smart, really thoughtful people who are thinking about school finances. And one of the advantages of being at a charter is that you're not subject to what is called categorical funding. For many, many schools in America, they tell you this is how much you must spend on books. This is how much you must spend on drug counseling. This is how much you must spend on all these different categories. And so the superintendent can't actually do resource allocation. We have the opposite problem. We kind of have a blank sheet, and we've got to figure out what is productive, what is educationally productive. If I spend $1 more on chess, what is that going to net me from an experiential perspective? Do I spend it on chess or debate? Do I spend it on coding or not? And how many children are going to benefit from the coding versus the chess? And really having a very detailed sense of the resource allocation, it's absolutely critical. And it's critical if you are a social justice warrior. You need the financial expertise because you can't do it without allocating the money.
I know we don't have time, but I want to know the answer. How do you choose between coding and chess? Or I saw that in one of the articles I was reading before this that you guys have Monopoly games. Like, how you guys choose between all of that? That's wild. I can't imagine.
Well, we do think that games are really important for children, and playing games, and it's sort of has been underestimated by educators. So we play Blockus and Backgammon and Monopoly and Settlers of Catan. We really believe that games are incredibly educational for kids, not only in terms of thinking, but in terms of the collaborative skills that kids are learning in terms of playing together.
Awesome. Okay, so I will go to Lev, from a student at Rochester Institute of Technology, for the final question. Lev wants to know, so you named a lot of skills that ultimately help people be great teachers, but they want to know, like, what is the number one skill or attribute that you believe separates the very best teachers from merely good teachers? Is there one thing?
Well, first of all, I've seen a lot of teachers start off very poor and get better. So you can't sort of peg someone just because you don't know how to do it well. It takes this commitment to continuous improvement. You're not going to be great first month of school. It takes a few years, but I would say hunger to learn is the most. If you love learning, you already are ahead of the game. And can you imagine if you don't love learning, it would be a little hard to inspire kids to learn.
Yeah.
So you do have to love learning. It has to be something you enjoy and you are really enthusiastic about. I would also say you have to love seeing others learn. Like, for me personally, I just get a huge charge out of seeing kids who don't know and understand something one moment, and then you pose a bunch of questions and the light bulb starts going on and they have this eureka moment. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that with kids. I also love that with adults. When someone has figured something out in life, in their career, that is, you have to love development of people, whether we talk about short people and tall people, but they're sort of the same. If you're a kindergarten teacher, you have to like seeing kids have the eureka moment. If you're a manager of adults, you have to like seeing the adults grow and learn and develop and come into their own. We always say that, we're an organization that wants to prepare people to leave. We don't want them to leave, but we see it as our moral obligation to put them in a position to take the next journey of their career. And so we invest enormously in the development of the adults, just like we invest enormously in the development of the kids.
Wow, that's awesome. And what a great note to end on. So on behalf of our entire country, I should say, you know, healthcare workers are certainly one of the heroes in this crisis, and teachers certainly have been the other, and so, or one of the others. And so thank you so much to your whole organization for everything they're doing to bring innovation to technology. And thank you for being such a, you know, a leader in this fight to build more equity among the education system. So thank you so much for everything you do. To everyone watching, thank you so much for joining and for your incredible questions. We got to more than half of them, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but you did ask great questions, so thank you. And this will be recorded and posted to YouTube. So for everyone who, if you know someone who wanted to watch and missed it, you can absolutely get that link on the website that you used to sign up. So Eva, thank you so much again. To everyone watching, just a quick reminder, Success Academy is absolutely hiring. They're hiring a lot throughout the year. So feel free to check out that link we posted, or you can just go to WayUp and type in Success Academy and definitely submit your interest. So Eva, thank you so much.
Thank you.